I live in a small cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. The next nearest neighborhood is over 4 miles away. One night, a few years ago, we got over 1.5 feet of snow overnight. We're very far from the main road, and on the weekends our roads typically remain unplowed for a while. I went out back through my deck door to admire the snow-draped trees and the still heavily falling flurries when I noticed footprints that led to my door, as well as going away. It looked as if a person was trying to come inside. I looked and saw that they came from my neighbor's side, and thought that one of their more delinquent kids was playing a joke, as my sledding tube on the railing was deflated. I decided I'd wait till later, as it was early to call their parents. I went on Facebook, and after scrolling for a bit, I noticed one of my neighbors closer to the entrance posted something asking, "Did someone knock for me at my back door?" I immediately called that neighbor and told her I had something that may be related to her inquiry. I then called the first house at the start of our street and told him what was going on. He went and checked, and sure enough, footprints were by his back door as well. A chain of phone calls then followed. I called the family at the other end of our street, but they saw no footprints. Then my next door neighbor calls, saying she called the woman that lives next to the end house of the cul-de-sac. We'll call this lady Jean. Jean said that she had found footprints that led to her door. However, there weren't any footprints that led away. By this point, the police were already called, but we decided to call again as we figured this was serious. They told us there would be a delay as the roads were still unplowed, and the private company that sends the snowplows couldn't send any for a few hours. Jean was so freaked out that one of the husbands, who was a huge bear of a man, across the road texted her and offered to let her stay at his and his wife's place. After Jean left, a number of neighbors went out to put up live feed hunting cameras, each facing an exit of her house. Unfortunately, the cameras weren't able to pick up anyone else leaving the house. Around 7 p.m., a plow truck arrived, followed by 3 cop cars. Jean and the couple she was staying with went to her house and stood by the doorway as the police searched. Initially, they found nothing, but Jean begged them to keep looking. 2 of the cops decided to double-check the basement. After a few minutes, one of the officers came up and took Jean down to the basement, where she could hear hysterical crying. By this time, all us neighbors were all out there so we could hear it too. Myself and a few of the other guys started moving towards the basement door, but were stopped by one of the officers. They told us they found someone hiding under a cover opening in the stairwell that Jean didn't even know existed. A few minutes later, a scruffy man was led out in cuffs, kicking and screaming. In his little campout, they found blankets she just cleaned and put away. In the guest room next to hers, she found the man's dirty clothes tucked underneath the bed. Needless to say, Jean became constantly scared and paranoid from then. She stayed in other people's houses for a long time before going back. Even then, she wouldn't stay alone. She sold the house the next summer. The man turned out to be a thrill-seeking junkie who was on probation for assault against a family member. The cops told us that they presumed he didn't want to stay at his apartment after a fight with his roommate, and drove off in his roommate's car from the county over, and got stuck in our unplowed road. I'm glad I caught the footprints when I did, and for calling the neighbors about what was going on. Jean is extremely lucky the man simply chose to hide out in her basement the whole time he was there. If we hadn't found out about him as soon as we did, I'd hate to think what else he could have done. The events here took place when I was 11 years old and on vacation with my family. My mother, younger brother, and I went down to Port Elizabeth to visit family. Being the only kids present meant we were more excited to play in the ocean than spend time indoors. My mom picked a sunny day. We packed our boogie boards and we headed to the nearest beach with my grandma tagging along. My brother and I ran towards a set of stairs leading down to the beach. I stopped. There were eyes on me. I sensed it. Growing up in South Africa, you are taught to be vigilant. Notice your surroundings. Notice people, especially. I looked around the crowd, trying to pinpoint what was setting my radar off. Then, I found it. 2 men, about 20 meters in front of me, about late 20s to early 30s. They were frozen in place, staring at me with big, toothy smiles on their faces. I returned a smile and a nod, acknowledging their presence, but also making them aware I saw them. Be friendly, I thought, not naive. Be polite, but don't trust. Since arriving, I had been observing them. Their presence made me uneasy. The crowd was moving around them. They didn't speak to one another, and they only seemed to move as I glanced away. I was alarmed, but only made a mental note to keep an eye on them, continued down the stairs, and jumped into the soft sand. My brother and I waited for the adults to pick a spot to set up before we took off swimming. After some time, I saw the men from earlier wade into the water quite some distance from us, and felt a bit silly for still worrying about them. However, I just couldn't shake that uneasiness. I got out and took a rest next to my mom. I didn't see the men anywhere, but the feeling of having eyes on me remained. I assumed I was just being paranoid and went back to the water after a few minutes. My brother had gotten out of the water and started digging his magnificent sand pit, so I decided to use him as a landmark to determine my position in the water while riding the waves out. I did this a few times. Suddenly, goosebumps shot up my back. I looked around, and the same men were just a few meters away from me, waving and beckoning me towards them. I was having fun up until then, and hadn't noticed them approaching. Adrenaline set in as I saw them smiling once more. Their eyes seemed blank, insincere, and out of place with those huge grins. I nervously grinned back and just shook my head at their invitation to come closer. I'm sure the fear was written all over my face, though. As if to confirm my fears of their intentions, they started coming towards me. I knew I wouldn't be strong enough in the water to fight, run, or swim, and nobody was close enough to hear me call out. As I was panicking, the water suddenly pulled me deeper into the sea. A big wave was coming. I placed my boogie board in position and started paddling. I was now further into the ocean than those creeps. The wave hit when they were about a meter away, and it took me right past them. I felt relieved for a split second, but then felt a hand grabbing and yanking my ankle hard. My heart caught in my throat. I kicked out of instinct. Fortunately, being sunscreen doused, I was slippery and managed to get free instantly. The wave carried me all the way to the beach. I was coughing with a mouth full of seawater, but scampered to my feet and ran to fetch my brother. I told him I'd race him back to Mom, and he was delighted for the challenge. I glanced back from where the sea had just ejected me. The creeps were still standing where they were, still smiling and waving. I stayed at my mom's side until we finally packed up to head home. As we walked to our car, I looked over my shoulder. There they were, 2 grown men, staring, smiling, and waving at a child they had tried to grab like nothing was weird. Then they turned around and disappeared in the crowd. Let's not meet again, you smiley fucks.